Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm Pat Cooley, the president of IT Productivity, and I'm joined by Keith Konecke, who runs our service delivery team. And October 19th, 2021, it's a beautiful day outside in the Maryland, DC area. And we're right here at the end of 2021 in Q4. And this is a perfect topic for executives as we think about our security posture ending 2021 and preparing for 2022. Today's webinar is an executive level webinar where we're going to go over the key challenges and security concerns we're seeing today, how to adopt a zero trust approach in a way that can accelerate your success, and really how you can start and incrementally move forward from wherever you are. And then emphasize this idea of executive level of engagement and tying this in as a business priority and building a culture of cybersecurity in your organization and how important that is. So Keith, the Microsoft Digital Defense Report just came out. And these were some of the key takeaways that we pulled forward. I mean, what did you get from the report? And as we talk to the executives that have joined us today, what are we trying to call to mind? Because really what we're trying to do is set the context of why is this conversation so important? And then once we've done that and give you an idea of the problems and things we're seeing, we're going to pretty quickly go into direct actions you can take. Because more than anything, I believe that the path forwards for small, medium businesses is clearer than it's ever been. I believe that the Microsoft platform to support that problem and address those concerns is in a better position than it's ever been, and that we can take action now, that there's no need for really fear, uncertainty, and doubt, because there's a clear path forward. Keith, what did you get from the defense report? What were the key findings that grabbed your attention?
What I got from the defense report, if I were to just summarize the main takeaway quickly, is that as the world is moving towards a more hybrid workforce, just like it says there, the stakes have changed. We're seeing massive growth in attacks. The attack vectors are growing, and organizations that aren't adopting a basic cybersecurity hygiene as part of that incremental first step towards zero trust security are just asking to be compromised at some point.
Yeah, I think this chart's a little hard to see. I'm responsible for that one, so I apologize for that. But that first bar there, that's so much dramatically bigger than everything else, that's the United States versus the other countries. Well, let's go into a couple of the key findings. So the interesting thing is, as we've moved into a more hybrid work environment, there's also been this digitalization across industries and organizations. Like, more is being done with digital adoption. And what that means is that the threat vector is bigger. And then you have Internet of Things. We all have smart TVs and other devices popping up in our office and at our homes. And now that homes are offices, all of that is a potential weakness that could compromise your data, compromise your systems and your employees. And as we look at the complexity of that, we get back to the basics. So this is an excerpt from the Microsoft digital report that just released. And Keith, what's this telling us?
Well, what this is telling us is, like I said, the shift to working remote is creating these different attack vectors. You can see here in just the first half of 21, there were these three major attacks that made the news: the SolarWinds supply chain attack, an on-premise exchange vulnerability that was exploited, and the big Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack we all heard about on the news. And this is telling us that where it says the basics matter, it's all about starting layering security on as an incremental approach with zero trust. Know who your users are, and that when they're logging in, they are who they say they are. Know what devices are connecting to your resources and verifying that those devices are healthy. And also making sure that you're logging all of that data so that you can check for signals that something might be anomalous that could indicate that there's an attacker trying to get into your network.
And when I hear those big stories as an executive, I mean, I know it could be me, but it's always these big ones we hear about. But the exact ways they got compromised are highly relevant to our environment. You know, one's through a VPN, where credentials had been exposed. I mean, the way these happened is the same way it happens in small businesses. And the reality is the nature of cybercrime today is not necessarily targeted when small businesses are wrapped up. It's opportunistic. They're going after millions of email addresses and domains and organizations at the same time. They're not targeting the individual organization, and we just get swept up in that. But what I like, because again, this is back to like practical things we can do now. When you look at these, you know, if your organization's already deployed MFA, and we mean across the board, network logins, cloud logins to Microsoft 365 and other cloud services. If you have a VPN, MFA at the VPN, if you've done that, you've already taken a major step forward. And then talking about making sure that devices are managed and healthy, we're going to get into that and how Microsoft handles that through mobile device, mobile application management, and their XDR and SIM product, which get us right down into these monitoring of signals and what does that mean. We'll get right into that here. So really wrapping up the report, I pulled this out because you know, 3 really basic steps. Anything here you want to touch on, Keith?
Sure. Those 3 basic steps are: number 1, prepare a recovery plan. You need an incident response plan, super important. If and when you are attacked, whether it's ransomware, you want to be prepared to engage your cyber insurance provider, make sure that they have the legal resources and the technical resources you need. Ideally, you want to be able to recover without having to pay that ransom. You want to make sure that ahead of time you're limiting the scope of damage by protecting privileged roles, protecting your data, so that if an attacker does get into your system, they're limited in what they can do. And then finally, just make it harder for them to get in with those incremental risk remediation steps you can take: MFA, user credential protection, device protection.
So at an executive level, I mean, this is echoing defense in depth, which we've been talking about for years, and then we're going to go into how Zero Trust can build on that. But this idea at the very front end of an incident response plan, didn't hear that a lot 5 years ago in the small medium business. And an incident response plan is so important because if you had a ransomware event or some type of breach and you're under any kind of compliancy requirement, or if you're just a small business and it's an issue that's large enough that you're going to reach back and use your cyber insurance, you can't have IT just jump in and start solving problems. That can become an issue. So the first thing you have to do is engage your cyber insurance, and they're going to bring the teams in to assess what's going on, figure out the best path forward, provide legal assistance and PR if there's, you know, information sharing and constituents that need to be updated. They're going to make sure that's all managed well, and even a ransom negotiating team if that's the appropriate course of action. So making sure there's an incident response plan for your specific organization and that you've connected with your cyber insurance company to see what their playbook looks like, and that IT is aligned with that, that you're bringing that to us if we're your IT provider and or your internal IT to make sure they know how to respond accordingly. So executive action is really where we're going here, trying to give you the backdrop of what's going on and what steps you can take. And we're seeing that across the board. I mean, the cyber defense report is Microsoft taking executive action. Us doing these webinars is the IT productivity team engaging with our clients in the market to encourage executive action. And we're doing this in our quarterly strategy alignments with our clients. And in May of this year, May 12th, we saw Biden issue this executive order for improving the nation's cybersecurity. And a few of these are expanded and some of them are still collapsed. But really the idea that modernizing, the second one here says modernizing and implementing stronger cybersecurity. And it calls on this idea of using cloud services and the zero trust architecture. And then as we go down, we get to this creating a standard playbook. And what I like is that the Microsoft platform provides all of this for us in various ways. And then IT Productivity's managed services called ITP 365, we wrap around that and provide a total answer, you know, for clients. It's also a playbook that can be emulated internally to the degree that you align with what we're discussing here. So Keith, let's jump into zero trust, because zero trust is not a product. You're not going to buy it from one vendor and get it applied. It's really a framework or a philosophy, a way to think about IT in a different way that provides much better results. Can you touch on
Exactly.
the core three principles here?
Yeah, so with zero trust, you always want to assume breach. The old way of thinking was that you would trust a location, you would trust your network, you would have a perimeter. But now that we have resources moving outside of the perimeter, we no longer want to trust anything. We want to verify explicitly. So that means that you want to verify all your users, you want to verify all your devices, your apps, networks that are being used, infrastructure, all of that, and use least privileged access, meaning that make sure that users only have the access that they need so that if and when someone is exploited, they're limited in what they can access and the damage that can be done.
And the important change there too is that goes for your administrators. So every administrator in our environment, which is limited, including myself, I have a administrator account that I use very rarely, but it's a separate account where I can elevate my privileges only when and if those privileges are needed. So the thing that I'm traveling around, my identity that's out there in the wild on a day-to-day basis, has very limited rights if for some reason that got exploited. Whoa, took a little detour there. All right, let's step forward. So Keith, I really like this graphic. So the zero trust philosophy really starts to break IT into these 6 separate domains. And there are methods and approaches that can be applied to every one of them to increase security. So when Keith touched on that idea that we're no longer inside the fort, we're not behind the firewall, we're not in the office. If you think about it, the new security perimeter is really identity. So how do we validate that that the people that are trying to log in have rights and that those credentials are being managed properly? And then the next domain is the endpoints themselves, the iPads, the iPhones, the Microsoft Surface device, the notebook, even the desktops that we're logging in from. We're extending this type of capability across that. And now that this is all cloud-based, the idea of doing data level protection and encryption at the data level, and I don't mean data in transit or data when it's stored on SharePoint or OneDrive or Microsoft Teams. I mean at the data level with encryption that can move with that through Microsoft Information Protection is now very accessible, right? Like the cost to do this are at a per user per month level that as our teams grow or get smaller and adapt, that price point can ebb and flow with that. So it's a very cost-effective approach that can give us a very comprehensive position. And the same applies for applications and infrastructure and network. And more, the infrastructure costs are being deferred into a software as a service, infrastructure as a service, or platform as a service model, where a lot of those big upfront CapEx expenses are going away. And we've really been seeing that across the client base. Keith, this dives in a little bit deeper to talk about the zero trust architecture. And I guess what I'd like you to help us understand as executives is like, what's really going on from an identity perspective? What does that mean to me on a day-to-day basis and my users? Like, how are we protecting identity and what's the experience look like for us?
So the first thing we're doing to protect identity is enforcement of multi-factor authentication. That's extremely important. If your users need something that they have with them, such as their mobile phone, to log in, it makes it a lot harder for an attacker with a compromised password to exploit that account. Other things that we may be looking at are using conditional access policies to see where that user is logging in from. When an account is compromised, almost 100% of the time, you're going to see those accounts logging in from a faraway location. It may not be offshore, but it might be in a different part of the country. So we can be looking for impossible logins, or someone logged in from Virginia, but then logged in from Boston, Massachusetts 5 minutes later. that's a big red flag that an account has been compromised.
So with the sophistication of the bad actors out there and all these different security risks we see, and then throw on top of that, we're working from all over the place and really any time of the day, potentially. The interesting thing is it just compels us to go to a cloud-centric security model, and then the cloud ends up delivering the answer. This level of granular, conditional, kind of multifaceted security can easily be provided through the Microsoft cloud and the computing capabilities and the intelligence that it brings to the table. And that's how we deliver this. There's certainly other choices and approaches, but the majority of our client base, actually all of our client base at some level, has already adopted Microsoft 365. So it's a natural progressive add-on to lean into that platform more and leverage it as the control plane for delivering zero trust across the organization. And as we do that and we adopt more cloud-based applications, we're actually making it easier for our users and more secure at the same time, because we no longer need a VPN to get to our data because of the way we're publishing it through a zero trust model and applications like Microsoft Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive. Anything else here, Keith?
We can touch on devices quickly. In addition to your users, you want to also be verifying your devices. So you want to have an inventory of devices that are connecting. You want to be able to see the risk state of that device. If there is malware installed on that device, you want to be able to see that and deny access to your resources by policy until that issue is remediated.
So zero trust is seeing the behavior of the users, the behavior of the devices, the state of the data. It can, we can publish what applications are sanctioned versus unsanctioned. We can do things to secure and micro-segment networks, and we can move our infrastructure into more and more secure patterns and ways of delivery that give us more security and control. So now we want to cut over to adopting, and I think that'll help us understand what all this means. Like, what are the practical steps we need to take, and what does that look like? And that really, we've been touching on it the whole time, that Microsoft's got an integrated approach to providing this whole solution. So Keith, Microsoft Business Premium, I feel like we've spent years preaching this one. I feel like we have 80–90% adoption in the client base. And once you have Microsoft Business Premium in there, if you notice, Microsoft Business Standard looks a lot the same across that top bar. It's the same great productivity apps. But Business Premium is starting to introduce really the platform and technologies that we need to implement zero trust, and not just give us a great productivity platform, but an awesome security platform and status.
Yeah, early on in this webinar, I touched on the importance of having a basic cybersecurity hygiene baseline, and Microsoft 365 Business Premium really gives you that toolbox that you need to establish that basic cybersecurity baseline.
Yep, well said. So I love this, and as an executive, I think you should love this as well, because this is built into the Microsoft 365 platform. And the more you adopt the platform, the more accurate it gets. But this is a direct security dashboard provided inside your Microsoft 365 tenant that tells you where you are. So IT, even here in this webinar, I'm sure we're giving you more information in some areas than you'd like. IT can flood or speak a different language than business sometimes. This is a dashboard that an executive can look at and get a really good understanding that a 46 is not where we need to be, right? And what we see is that we can easily, with a Microsoft Business Premium platform, we can get you into the 80 percentile here, and that's where you should be at this point. Today, with all the risks that we're seeing, getting into that 80–90% range is really where 98% of your risk is going to be gone. You've mitigated. We can't promise that you won't have a security incident, But if you get this into the 80 percentile, the probability, we've knocked out 98% of those risks. You've made it really hard to get into your environment, right? And we've segmented the risks in a way that if something happens, a breach of one account is much less likely to breach or create an organization-wide incident. Every time I visit a new potential client, we look at secure scores, and just in the last 2 weeks, I've seen a 19%. I saw 40, something in the 40 range, which was higher than normal. Again, as we deploy Microsoft Business Premium, we drive this up into the 80. I don't know about 90 percentile. There's some trade-offs that start to happen when you get to the upper end of it, but I would say solid 80s. Does that sound right, Keith?
Yeah, that sounds right to me.
I like this deck. We have a presentation that walks into every one of these components and explains it. And for the purpose of executive brevity, we're going to hit this alone and then kind of wrap up. This is the Microsoft reference architecture for how we deliver a zero trust approach. And if you look, the way it's grouped, just kind of familiarize with what you're seeing here, because we're going to talk about this for a few minutes. In that top left-hand corner, we see users. That's one of those control planes that we need to pay a lot of attention to. And then under it, we see devices. And to the right of it, we see the Microsoft components that are helping us deliver the appropriate zero trust level of security in these areas. And then in the middle, you see this giant security and compliance policy engine. So this is all of this telemetry and data being fed up to into the Microsoft cloud from your users and your devices in a way that not only can we see across your organization and make better decisions based on your policies and what's appropriate for your organization, but we also get all the telemetry that Microsoft has. And they are now collecting more security telemetry than any organization in the world. So we have a tremendous amount of intelligence, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and then policy statements and things that can put us in a secure position much quicker. And remember, the Microsoft tax we're paying there is a per user per month investment, which I think we get huge leverage out of. And then on the right-hand side, we see Microsoft Information Protection, which is where we can start getting very specific policies. We can categorize data. We can apply policies automatically and controls automatically. And we're collaborating with an organization that needs us to use Dropbox or share data onto another cloud. Microsoft Information Protection can travel with our data and give us controls even after we've allowed sharing with other organizations and third parties. And then Microsoft Cloud Application Security we'll touch on, at the end to give you an understanding of where that can come in and to help even protect us against shadow IT. So what I like is even when we deploy Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, we get Cloud App Discovery where we can start to see what our managed endpoints, what are users using, what cloud apps are being used in our environment. And it can help us identify risk or just understand that it's out there. And then if we step up the Microsoft Cloud Application Security and the Microsoft Information Protection that's on the right-hand side there, that would represent a slight increase in per user per month investment in order to activate the licensing for that. So with that setup, Keith, I'd like you to kind of walk us through this a little bit, again, kind of at an executive level to understand the pieces a little bit more.
Sure. So let's start with identity and users. We have Microsoft Azure Active Directory and Microsoft 365 Defender. Microsoft Azure Active Directory is going to be your database of users. That's where all of your identities are going to be centralized. And ideally, you want as many applications authenticating through Azure Active Directory as possible, including your non-Microsoft applications that support single sign-on. And Microsoft 365 Defender gives you the abilities to look at things like location, where users are logging in from, what type of session risk or user risk is being presented based on the location, such as what I said earlier, an impossible login from 2 different locations. Um, then we
Now,
move
this has
down.
also
Yep.
given us more security at our email that's coming in and out, right? Like it's given us safe links and secure files where it's looking at every file before it's opened on our computer, right?
Absolutely, and it's also giving you enhanced phishing and spoofing capabilities as well to help you fight against that. Phishing, particularly spear phishing, where specific names and executives are actually targeted in those campaigns, are becoming more and more of an issue. So those enhanced anti-phishing tools offer some great protection against those kinds of attacks. If we move down to devices, we see Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Microsoft Endpoint Manager is where mobile device management and mobile application management are going to come into play. So your company-owned devices can all be enrolled with mobile device management, gives you a lot of visibility and control over those devices. You can remotely wipe them if they get lost or stolen. And mobile application management is going to give you a lot of control over the data that users are accessing on their personally owned devices. And you do that by containerizing that data in protected apps. That way you don't have to be intrusive, have a user register and enroll a device that is not owned by the company, but at the same time, you're making sure that all of that data is protected in the same way, and you still have control over all of that data in those protected
I
applications.
think there's a really important distinction there too. And in all these terms, it can kind of get lost. So, Microsoft Endpoint Management has two main capabilities that are coming into play here. Mobile device management, or really endpoint management, because all of your company-owned devices, iPads, mobile devices, desktops, laptops, we're going to use mobile device management to fully manage those devices, which means if we see anything unhealthy, we can shut down connection from those devices. We can remotely wipe them. We have um, awesome control over these, whether they're in the office or remote, and moving in and out of the office, right? Like the notebook that I'm working with, doing this presentation on today, is defended by Microsoft mobile device management, and managed, I should say, right? Fully managed. And then my iPhone, which is a personal device, I do a lot of personal things on it. We don't allow our data to get published directly to non-managed apps. So I've agreed, well, I have to agree if I want to get company data to this personal device, to a policy that means it's going to go into managed applications, which would be Microsoft Outlook on this device, or Microsoft SharePoint, or Microsoft OneDrive, or Microsoft Teams on this device. And as a user, I can feel comfortable. The organization can't see what I'm doing in Safari and other applications. But at the same time, as an executive, I can erase the data from this device if we need to. If a user leaves, we can remotely wipe our company data off these devices without touching or interfering with the personal use that's going on in the device. We can also enforce policies, which are turned on by that big engine in the middle, right? The security and compliance engine, about, that device doesn't have a password. We don't want our data to sync to it. If that device shows any signs of not being secure, we can disallow that. So it gives us a lot of granular control. And what I like here is it's not this big state, big control thing. It's really we're publishing data. We're making it easier for our team to get to it, but we're not giving up security and governance at the same time. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. We can now get to the data easier, and we know it's more secure. And that's where the endpoint management comes into play. Anything you'd add on endpoint management, Keith?
No, I wouldn't add anything else to endpoint management. I would like to talk about Defender for Endpoint for a moment. That's another great tool that is offered. It's not part of Business Premium, it's an add-on, but it's very important. It's really the next generation of antivirus. Antivirus isn't enough anymore. It does do antivirus, looking for those traditional viruses and malware, but a lot of attacks today are people getting into your network. They're not deploying malware like they used to. They're looking around, they're hunting. Defender for Endpoint is looking for that kind of thing. It's protecting you against that kind of thing. It's protecting your files. So it's antivirus, but also a lot more.
And really, so this is also called an extended detection response platform, or XDR. And that's because our device with the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint license on it is feeding all that telemetry into the Microsoft cloud, along with the telemetry from Microsoft 365 Defender and all of the logins from our users and all these other components as part of the Zero Trust platform. And now we're getting a fuller picture. And then at the bottom of this reference architecture, you see Microsoft Azure Sentinel. And we're not going to touch on that deeply here, but this is a large platform that gives a lot of extended capability and security and control to make us more compliant, and becomes even more important when we have security compliance standards that we want to be involved in. But Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is going to take all that information and what's going on with your devices and feed it up so we can see it, and it can be part of the security decisions that are being made for your organization. You also get the benefit of all Microsoft's best practice and insights and kind of just-in-time information, because we can set this up in a way that certain things can have immediate effect to help defend our environment as it gets identified. So Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is a really critical component that is kind of activating really advanced capabilities in our environment. And I think a commercial license for that, if you're not a nonprofit organization, is, I believe, $5.20 per user per month, roughly. It's on the fair way. And I only share that because I believe that is a very cost-effective way to dramatically move forward our security posture.
Yes, I agree. So moving on in this graphic, over on the right, we're looking at ways that we can protect data. So Microsoft Information Protection, as you can see here, you can actually apply this to your data, both in the Microsoft Cloud and in cloud SaaS apps. It will allow you to do things such as starting to classify your data. Files can be classified as confidential, highly confidential, whatever works for your organization. And then you can start applying controls to those. What types of files require encryption? What types of files can be moved only to certain locations? What types of files are allowed to be sent out of the organization? So you get some data loss prevention there. And Microsoft Cloud App Security gives you insight into what's known as shadow IT, because you have users using web apps that you may not know of. So if you have users, for example, using Dropbox, potentially moving your data into Dropbox, you want some insight into that and some controls over what users are allowed to do with your company's data.
So when you look at this reference architecture in its totality, it's giving us a way to respond to today's risks, a zero trust approach, and the ability to align with really important compliancy requirements. So if you're under HIPAA or FINRA or the new CMMC requirements, this is going to give you a platform that can take you to CMMC level 3, 4, and 5. There's going to be some other steps involved in the further maturity in that. But and then if you're a small medium business that's not under compliancy, if you're interested in aligning with like NIST Cybersecurity Framework, the CSF, this is going to again be a platform, and they even have a compliancy manager built into Microsoft that can show you how well you align, much like the Secure Score, where we're going to get direct feedback from Microsoft. And I think that's super powerful, because now you're not just relying on IT in our opinions, but you're getting direct third-party feedback from the platform vendor. So let's talk about executive engagement. I think we've done a good job framing out the problem and challenge, which is only accelerating, right? It's 2022 promises to have more risk, and implementing this is going to mitigate 98% of it. Now, to do this at an executive level, we have to kind of comprehend, what does our true cost of IT look like? What are our organizational priorities? How do we think about productivity, Do we understand our risk posture, our compliancy concerns? What are our priorities there? These tools will also put you in a position where it's known risk versus unknown risk, which I think is really important. And then ultimately that drives our investment strategy, which is the platform we build all this on. Our approach is that we provide our clients with a technology alignment report that's built off very specific standards that align with those business priorities and decisions. So they have a clear status and understanding of their IT so they can make good informed investment decisions. And I think that's important that you get from IT regardless of who's providing it for you. And then you're always going to see this Arthur Nielsen quote hanging around with me. I love this idea that the price of doing it right is so much less than the cost of doing it wrong, or a cyber incident occurring, or even the hassle and worry and productivity penalties we pay when we don't make the right investment choices, right? There's huge productivity penalties when we're not, going about this right. I would encourage you to understand what's your current state across these key areas of zero trust and start to formulate what's the desired state look like. Look for quick wins. Like, this is an incremental, we can go right to your biggest risk, and there's a control here. This is cloud-based controls. I mean, these can be implemented very quickly. And then have a plan. I mean, it's not just a one initiative we want to do here. We want to look for where are the initiatives we can do now to end the year right, or maybe start 2022 in a more secure posture. And then what do the plans look like quarterly to continue to mature that? And most importantly, as we're getting all that telemetry, do we have the level of mature IT in place to interpret our security posture and respond accordingly on a day-by-day basis? If there's anything we can do to help, here's our contact data. Really the call to action: clarify your business priorities. Make sure you have an IT roadmap that maps this out, and take the first steps. Plan next steps, but take steps now. And then I really encourage you to commit to a quarterly strategy alignment rhythm. It plays a huge role, and the executives that are engaged in this process, we always see better results for their organization. So I hope this was helpful. Keith, thanks for your assistance. I trust you and rely on you for kind of helping us adopt the Microsoft cybersecurity framework and being zero trust aligned. I know as an executive of my own small business, I really feel like we're 98%, 99% protected. I can tell you that the clients that have been along this journey with us, we've never had a ransomware event go organization wide with any of our customers that are even halfway along this journey. What about for you, Keith? What do you have in closing?
Just thank you, Pat. Appreciate the kind words, and I would encourage everyone to take a look at the current state of their environment and see what you can do to start securing things now. Start with MFA, biggest bang for your buck right there.
Right. So I just leave you with the encouraging method. The path forward is clearer than ever. The Microsoft platform is stronger than ever, and you can get going right away. There's incremental steps to be made. So onward and upward.